Listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because this is not just another message. It has reached you for a reason that goes deeper than coincidence. Out of everything you could have been doing right now, something made you pause here. And before this message ends, you'll begin to understand why someone in your life has been acting distant, uncertain, and emotionally inconsistent, yet still cannot fully let you go. There is a very specific person who feels more for you than you currently realize. When everything around them goes quiet, their thoughts drift back to you. They replay your conversations, revisit your words, and quietly look for any trace of you without even admitting it to themselves. But despite these feelings, something inside them creates resistance. Something they don't fully understand yet is holding them back. And surprisingly, it is connected to how they perceive you on a deeper level, including your appearance. But don't jump to conclusions or let your mind create painful assumptions. This is not about beauty, perfection, or any standards the world has forced onto people. It is something much more emotional and far more hidden than that. In reality, what they struggle with is not something wrong about you. It is something real about you. And that truth unsettles them more than they expected. Because while most people only see the surface of you, this person sees beyond it. Others notice your smile, but they sense the emotions you try to hide behind it. Others hear your laughter, but they can feel the exhaustion underneath it. Others look at you briefly and move on. But this person pays attention in a way that feels almost intense, as if every detail about you carries meaning. And that level of awareness makes them uneasy. Not because there is anything wrong with you, but because being emotionally seen so clearly feels overwhelming to them. Your presence brings out feelings in people they usually keep buried. You don't even try to do it. It just happens naturally. Maybe it is the tiredness your eyes sometimes carry. Maybe it is the way you hide your pain behind strength. Maybe it is the quiet insecurity you think no one notices. But they notice. They notice everything. And it affects them more than they can explain, because they never expected to feel this deeply about someone who feels so real, so open, so emotionally honest. In their mind, they were prepared for something simple. Temporary conversations, predictable emotions, connections that didn't demand too much from them. But then you appeared, and suddenly, nothing felt under control anymore. There are moments when they find themselves looking at your pictures longer than they should. Not to judge you, not to find flaws, but because something about your presence pulls at them in a way they cannot logically explain. One part of them feels drawn toward you, while another part steps back out of fear because your emotional honesty feels like something they can't hide from. What unsettles them most is not imperfection in you, but authenticity. In a world where so many people wear masks, adjust their personalities, and hide behind carefully built versions of themselves, your energy feels unfiltered and real. And realness has a way of forcing people to confront their own truth. That is why they feel pulled in and pushed away at the same time. That is why their behavior changes without warning. That is why their emotions seem inconsistent when it comes to you. Every time they think about you, something inside them reacts in ways they don't fully control. And slowly, quietly, the emotional walls they built over time are starting to weaken. But before anything becomes clear between you two, there will be a moment. It might look small from the outside. A brief conversation, a shared glance, or even a silence that feels heavier than usual. Yet, in that moment, something will shift. And afterward, you will begin to understand their behavior much more clearly, because underneath everything, their distance has always been rooted in fear. Fear of being emotionally exposed. Fear of being seen too clearly. Fear that someone like you could reveal parts of themselves they thought were long buried. They remember things about you that you may not even notice about yourself. The way your expression changes when you're holding back tears. The way your eyes shift when you feel overwhelmed. The way your face softens when you finally feel understood. These small details stay in their mind, replaying again and again. And instead of bringing them peace, it makes them feel vulnerable, because they are not used to being affected in this way. The truth is, Love doesn't arrive in a controlled or predictable form. It enters quietly without permission and changes the way someone feels before they even realize it. And now they find themselves caught between resisting what they feel and slowly giving into it. But here is what changes everything. The thing they are struggling to accept about you is not a flaw. It is a reflection. You awaken something inside them that connects to their own past wounds, emotions they thought they had already moved beyond. Not because you caused it, but because your presence brings those feelings back to the surface. That is why this connection feels so intense, so confusing, and so impossible for them to ignore. This message is brought to you by Jungian hidden truth. Something in this message found you for a reason, not by accident. Out of everything you could have been doing right now, something made you pause here. And before this ends, you'll start to understand why someone in your life has been acting distant, inconsistent, and emotionally unreadable, yet still unable to truly let you go. There is a very specific person who feels more for you than they openly show or even fully admit to themselves. When everything becomes quiet in their world, their thoughts drift toward you. They replay moments, revisit conversations, and search for traces of you in silence, even when they try not to. But at the same time, something inside them creates resistance. And what they are struggling with is not something wrong about you. It is something real about you, something that feels too honest for them to easily handle. Because while most people only see what is visible on the surface, this person experiences you differently. Others may notice your expression for a moment and move on, but they stay with it longer. They pick up on what is not being said, the weight behind your silence, the emotion behind your smile, the fatigue you try to hide behind strength. And that level of awareness unsettles them. Not because you are too much, but because you are too real for the emotional distance they usually keep between themselves and others. You make them feel things they are not always prepared to feel. Maybe it is the tiredness in your eyes. Maybe it is the way you try to stay strong even when something inside you feels heavy. Maybe it is the quiet vulnerability you never speak about but still carries through you. They notice it all, and instead of walking away, it pulls them in and pushes them back at the same time. That is why they sometimes go quiet around you. That is why they stare without speaking. That is why their energy shifts in ways you can feel but cannot fully explain. It is not rejection. It is not indifference. It is emotional overwhelm mixed with fear of what they are starting to feel. Because somewhere deep inside they already know something they are not ready to fully accept. You affect them in a way they cannot replace. No one else makes them feel quite the same way. No one else lingers in their thoughts the way you do. No one else stays in their emotional space like this, even when you are not present. And that is exactly what confuses them. In the beginning, they were not prepared for anything deep. They expected simple interactions, predictable emotions, and connections they could easily manage. But then you entered their awareness, and something stopped feeling simple anymore. Now even your absence feels present. There are moments when they think about you more than they intend to. Sometimes they look at your photos longer than they should, not to judge, not to search for flaws, but because something about your presence holds their attention in a way they cannot explain. One part of them is drawn forward. Another part steps back because your emotional honesty feels like something they cannot hide from. You don't even try to expose anything. Yet, you somehow reflect back what others usually keep buried. And that reflection is what makes them uncomfortable. What they are truly reacting to is not imperfection. It is authenticity. In a world where people often hide behind versions of themselves, your realness stands out without effort. And realness forces people to confront themselves. That is why they feel pulled closer and pushed away at the same time. That is why their behavior changes without warning. That is why silence sometimes feels louder than words between you. Over time, their emotional defenses are starting to weaken, slowly, quietly, without them fully realizing it. And sooner or later, there will be a moment between you. It may look small from the outside. A short exchange, a glance, a pause that lasts too long, but internally something will shift. And after that moment, things will not feel the same as before. because underneath everything, their distance has always been rooted in fear. Fear of being seen too clearly. Fear of being emotionally exposed. Fear that if they fully accept what they feel, they will lose control over it. They remember small details about you that stay in their mind longer than expected. The way your expression changes when you are holding something back. The way your eyes shift when you feel overwhelmed. The way your presence softens when you feel understood. These details replay in their mind again and again. And instead of making things easier, it makes everything more intense for them because real connection does not behave in a controlled way. It enters quietly, but it changes everything without permission. And now they are caught between resisting it and slowly giving into it. But here is the deeper truth. What they struggle to accept about you is not a flaw. It is a mirror. You bring out emotions in them that connect to parts of their own past they thought were already behind them. Not because you caused it, but because your presence reawakens something they buried. That is why this connection feels so intense. That is why it feels confusing. That is why it refuses to fade. And as time moves forward, denial becomes harder to maintain. Their resistance weakens. Their emotions grow louder. Their thoughts keep returning to the same place, back to you. At some point, they will reach a moment where avoiding it is no longer possible. A moment where they will have to face what they have been feeling all along. Whether they choose fear or honesty will define what happens next. But even now, something is already clear. You have stayed in their emotional world in a way they cannot undo. Even when they try to move on with logic, something in them keeps returning to you with feeling. And the truth they are avoiding is slowly becoming impossible to ignore. Because the more they try to step away, the more they realize one thing. They are not unaffected by you at all. They are deeply impacted by you. And that is what scares them the most. Not losing you, but realizing how much they already feel. What affects them the most is not just what they feel for you, but the fact that you have no idea any of this is happening inside them. On the outside, they look calm, controlled, almost unaffected. But beneath that surface, there is a quiet, emotional storm they constantly try to keep hidden. And what happens next slowly starts to reveal the real reason behind their distance, their hesitation, and their mixed signals. What they struggle with about you is not really physical in a simple sense. It is something deeper tied to vulnerability. Maybe it is the softness in your eyes that seems too honest to ignore. Maybe it is the tiredness you sometimes carry when life weighs heavily on you. Maybe it is that brief moment of sadness that slips through your smile before you quickly hide it again. Whatever it is, it doesn't just catch their attention. It affects them because it creates a feeling in them they are not used to, the urge to protect you. And that feeling is exactly what scares them. Not because you are doing anything wrong, but because once someone starts caring on that level, they also become emotionally exposed. And exposure means risk. Risk of getting attached, risk of getting hurt, risk of losing control over their own emotions. That is why they sometimes pull away without explanation. Not because their feelings disappear, but because the feelings become too strong to manage comfortably. There are moments, especially at night, when they replay everything in their mind. Not the loud or dramatic moments, but the quiet ones, the small expressions, the subtle shifts in your face, the way you look away when you are thinking deeply, the way you try to hide what you are feeling even though it still shows through. Those details stay with them longer than they expect because your presence communicates things you never say out loud. And somehow they still understand them. And that is part of what overwhelms them. They were not prepared to meet someone who feels this real. Life trained them to expect temporary people, temporary emotions, temporary attention. But you didn't feel temporary to them. You felt genuine. And now their emotional defenses don't work the way they used to. Without even realizing it, they start comparing others to you. Other conversations feel less meaningful. Other connections feel less present. Even silence with you feels different, like it carries weight instead of emptiness. And the strange part is they notice this shift, even if they don't fully understand it, because nothing else seems to replace the emotional presence you leave behind. Here is the truth they are slowly approaching, but not ready to fully admit yet. What unsettles them about you is also what makes them feel emotionally safe with you. Your imperfections don't push them away. They ground them. Your realness doesn't confuse them. It comforts them. Your authenticity doesn't overwhelm them in a negative way. It makes them feel like they are dealing with something honest for once. In a world where so many people carefully construct versions of themselves, you feel unfiltered, human, natural, and that kind of presence is rare enough to stay in someone's mind long after the moment has passed. That is why, even when they create distance, they still come back emotionally. Because something in you feels like understanding without explanation, like being seen without performing, like silence that doesn't feel empty. And over time, that becomes difficult to ignore. This person is slowly reaching a point where their internal resistance is weakening. Their attention keeps returning to you. Their emotional reactions feel less controlled. Their thoughts drift back more often than they want to admit. And when that resistance finally breaks down, things will start making sense in hindsight. They will begin to understand why they stared a little too long, why they became quiet around you, why their energy shifted without warning, why they seemed emotionally affected in moments that looked ordinary from the outside. And the answer will feel simple but powerful. It was never indifference. It was never rejection. It was attachment, a connection that formed quietly, deeply, and in ways they didn't fully recognize at first. Now, the weight of pretending feels heavier than the truth itself. And slowly, what they have been avoiding starts becoming harder to suppress because some connections don't fade when ignored. They grow in silence. They deepen in distance. They remain even when unspoken. And whether they admit it soon or much later, one truth is already forming inside them clearly. You mattered to them in a way they didn't expect. And once someone reaches that level of emotional attachment, nothing about how they see you or themselves can stay exactly the same. And once someone reaches that level of emotional attachment, nothing about how they see you or themselves can stay exactly the same. Because what they feel doesn't stay contained anymore. It starts influencing their thoughts, their reactions, even the way they interpret silence. At first, they try to ignore it. They convince themselves it is nothing serious, just attraction, just curiosity, just a passing emotional phase. But the problem is it doesn't pass. It stays. It returns. It grows quietly in the background. Even when they are focused on other things and slowly, without realizing it, you become part of their internal world. Not in a loud or dramatic way, but in a constant background presence. A thought that appears without invitation. A memory that returns without effort. A feeling that shows up even when they are trying to think about something else. That is why even ordinary moments with you start to feel different in their mind. A simple glance becomes something they remember longer than expected. A short interaction becomes something they replayed. A brief silence between you becomes something they analyze far more than they should because nothing about it feels ordinary to them anymore. And what makes it even more intense is that you are not doing anything to create this effect. You are simply being yourself. But to them, that being yourself carries a depth they did not anticipate. That is the part they struggle with the most because they cannot separate what they feel from what they see, and what they see in you is something that feels emotionally honest in a way they are not used to experiencing. There is a quiet tension building inside them. Not a negative one, but an emotional conflict. One part of them wants closeness. The other part wants distance. One part wants to understand you more deeply. The other part is afraid of what understanding might lead to because understanding you means understanding their own emotions more clearly as well. And that is something many people are not ready for. So they hesitate, they delay, they withdraw slightly, they return again. Their behavior becomes inconsistent, not because their feelings are unclear, but because their emotions are too clear and too intense for them to handle comfortably. But even in that inconsistency, one thing remains unchanged. Their attention always comes back to you. No matter how far they try to move mentally, something keeps pulling them back. A memory, a feeling, a thought, a moment. Something about you remains emotionally active inside them, and the more they try to suppress it, the more noticeable it becomes. Because emotions don't disappear just because they are ignored. They settle deeper. Over time, they begin to notice something even more unsettling. You are not just someone they think about. You are someone they emotionally respond to. Their mood shifts slightly depending on your presence or absence. Their focus changes when you are around. Their awareness sharpens without them trying. And this is where things become harder for them to control. Because now it is not just thought, it is feeling. It is reaction. It is internal response. And that is far more powerful than they expected. Still, they don't express it openly. They keep it contained. They act normal when others are watching. They maintain composure. They avoid showing too much. But inside the experience is very different. Inside there is movement. There is awareness. There is emotional activity that never fully settles. And the most confusing part for them is this. You are not forcing any of it. You are not chasing. You are not trying to create intensity. You are not demanding attention. You are simply existing. And that is enough to affect them deeply. That realization creates even more internal confusion because it challenges the way they usually understand their own emotions. They are used to situations where feelings are triggered by obvious actions, but here nothing obvious is happening, and yet everything inside them is responding. And that is what makes this connection feel different. It doesn't follow logic, it follows emotional truth. Emotional truth is not something people easily control. So they begin to reflect more quietly, privately. They question themselves in moments of silence. Why do I think about them so often? Why do I feel this shift when they are near? Why does their presence feel so different from everyone else? But the answers never come easily because the answers are not simple thoughts. They are feelings they are still trying to understand. And as this continues, something subtle begins to change in them. Their resistance weakens. Their emotional honesty increases. Their ability to deny what they feel starts fading slowly, not all at once, but gradually, like something softening inside them over time. And even though they may not express it yet, they are already moving toward acceptance. Because at some point, denial becomes more painful than truth. And truth, even when it is overwhelming, eventually feels easier than pretending. This is the stage they are entering now. The stage where silence becomes heavier, where emotions become harder to suppress, where thoughts become more persistent, where your presence becomes more difficult to ignore. And soon there will be a moment, small, ordinary on the outside, but internally significant enough to change everything. A moment where something in them stops resisting. A moment where what they feel becomes too obvious to hide even from themselves. And when that moment arrives, everything they have been avoiding will start to make sense in a completely new way. They will finally understand why they acted distant at times, why they hesitated, why they seemed emotionally overwhelmed, why they were not consistent, why they looked but didn't speak, why they stayed silent even when they had something to say. Because all of it was connected to one simple reality. They were feeling more than they could explain, and you were the reason. Not in a chaotic way, not in a destructive way, but in a deeply emotional, deeply human way that slowly reshaped their internal world. And now, even as they try to maintain distance, something inside them continues moving closer, not physically, emotionally. And that is the part they cannot fully control anymore. Because once someone becomes emotionally attached in this way, the connection doesn't simply end when ignored. It lingers, it grows, and eventually it demands to be acknowledged whether they are ready for it or